So Arcsine, let's talk about Arcsine. So for notation, Arcsine is equal sign, and this -1 up top, so this stands for the inverse sign. And what we're looking at is what's the domain and the range of this guy. So what we're going to do is we restrict the domain of the original sine function. So sine has a restricted domain. Typically sine's not going to be restricted. You can plug in any number you want. So it inputs an angle, and then it outputs a value. However, in order for arcsine or the inverse sine to actually be a function, we need to make sure that we take sine over the interval -pi/2 to pi/2. So here's what that's going to do. We restrict sine over this interval. Its output, so this is its domain. Its range is going to be the values between -1 and 1, including them. So if I draw a picture of what's going on here, here's the unit circle. Here's -pi/2. Here's pi/2. And we are restricting ourselves to this area right here. Okay, so these are our values that we can look at. So the sine measures height. So down here it's -1, and it'll take on all values up here to +1. That's why the range is here. So the domain is, we're going to say the following. We're going to say the sine of some angle between -pi/2 and pi/2 will be equal to some value over here. I don't know what it is. Let's call it y, between -1 and +1. So now when we reverse the process, the arcsine, or the inverse sine, is going to input a number between -1 and 1. So its domain, it'll take all numbers between -1 and 1, it'll input them, and it will output, or its range, will be from -pi/2 to pi/2. So when we make our little domain range table that you guys have there in that grid, here's sine, here's arcsine, here's domain, here's range. Let's block this off here. So the domain of the regular sine function is restricted to -pi/2, pi/2, and its output is from -1 to 1. Because an inverse function and a regular function switch x and y, they do the opposite. We're switching our domain and our range. So our range now means that whatever number you input into the arcsine, it'll give you a value between -pi/2 and pi/2 out, and the numbers that we can put in are from -1 to 1.